Okay, we are going to begin. We're doing this 12-part series, and I'm enjoying doing this, by the way. This is a great journey to take with you. So Stop, Look, and Listen made me think about this whole idea and the various kinds of railroad crossings. I beheld all my life seeing these things, but it never occurred to me until recently that that's a perfect metaphor for the spiritual life. Just occurred to me. That's why I had my friend Larry Green at a place that he calls home, and he actually put it there at my request. And so when people are going off to meditate, these are trails that he's now made for people to reflect. But isn't that a great sign? Stop, take a look, and listen. And that's exactly what we're invited to do by the Spirit of God. So when we think about those three concepts, then it occurred to me that, and I don't know what, I had this experience. It was one of those wonderful moments where all 12 of these hit me within a course of about a half an hour. So, in other words, I saw 4 things with stop, 4 things with look, and 4 things with listen. And so the first one with stop was, of course, of the 4. Was, let me just erase this thing. Okay. It was solitude and silence, and James 3 talks about the wisdom of this world as well, but being contemplative is an action. You carry your solitude with you into the public arena, that you can actually carry your silence with you. And so that although you may be speaking, you have a dialogue with God, you're still involved in that silence, in-depth understanding. And then paying attention to the journey, which has to do with practicing His presence. And as we said, we looked at 2 books that I've done on that because it's such an important, but I think largely overlooked theme that we take for granted what the Scriptures invite us to do constantly. And that's why I've been inviting you to ask those 3 questions once an hour. Once an hour. And you know what they are. Who do you say I am? It was the second one. What's the first one? What do you seek? What do you want more than anything else? And then, do you love me more than these? What do you love more than anything else? And if you can't say it's God, do you want it to be Him? So you start where you are. And those 3 questions, then trust the Father, abide in the Son, walk by the Spirit, those are actually ongoing practices that one can do so that you can do that constantly. And then we talked about attention to the story so that we grasp we're part of a story. We're not only in a journey day by day, but the context of the story, there's a telos, there's an end, there's a destination. It's not just going nowhere. God never builds a highway that leads to nowhere. He never builds a staircase that goes nowhere. It's always going to take you somewhere, but you won't know the way. It may be torturous, but He's going to get you safely home. He didn't tell you how it would be. And some people's lives are more like an outing on the QE2 in comparison with some for whom their journey is like a storm-tossed dinghy all the way. But they both get safely to the other side if they know Jesus, you see. And God, there's no guarantee as to what your story will be like. Then we talk about look again. So now going from stop, now let's use this metaphor of seeing. So how can you learn to see what others missed? Have any of you been practicing some of the exercises I gave you that we talked about last week? Of noticing and acknowledging and training yourself to have a greater acuity so you begin to behold what others miss. That's why I was talking about my love of beauty and what's in the midicosm, the biosphere, that you can just see it. You're surrounded by it. You're immersed in it. But most people don't notice it. But when you begin to look at trees and the bones of trees and their architecture, the more you look at it, the more astonishing it becomes. Anything will do. Any plant that God has made. We call them weeds, dandelions. Take a better look. And you see that marvel, and you realize this is something that's the glory of God. And so all these dynamics, even beautiful chickens, I showed you there. So, and speaking about beautiful chickens, I can't resist showing you this. Somebody gave me these eggs a couple of years ago, and he has an array of exotic chickens. And they create exotic colors. So these beautiful pastel colors are pleasing to the eyes. And then this one is a tremendous, kind of a color wheel. Isn't that amazing? But why did he put this one there? I mean, what were they thinking? That belongs down here, obviously. See, it bothers me. It's something that's an offense against my aesthetics. I can't help it. I'm sorry. But there's nothing wrong with that. But then I was showing you the various, for example, going back to the photographs, and I was showing you the whole idea of the bouquets that I've made for Karen, and just love to make. There's a lot of them. This is the latest one here. And things from our garden. And so the dahlias are amazing, just an amazing flower. And so just things I make from our garden, and they're splendid. And this is just, I thought I'd float these. You see, the sphere acanthus and the fuchsia, unbelievable, the colors. So just floating these camellias. And so there's an aesthetic, there's a noticing. This is the thing about it. Start training yourself to increase the aesthetics of your spirit. Because most men, if they're not careful, diminish in the aesthetics of the spirit. When you were dating the one who would be your wife, you used to open up the door and used to do all these little things and extra little gifts. What happened? Now I've got her, I don't need to do any of that anymore. See, now you just watch TV and eat snacks. So start to train yourself to even open the door. The little kindnesses occur. Never take things for granted. Increase your appetite, your aesthetic, your awareness of beauty is what I'm recommending. And now we're going to be looking at cultivating wonder, curiosity, and submission. And this relates to another aspect of looking that relates to this concept of the fact that all of us are exposed to beauty, but not all people wonder about it. In fact, I'll show it in another way. Just like the four soils. Remember the four soils that we've seen before, where we saw these four, but the number of them diminishes very greatly until by the time you hit the fourth soil. The ones who are hungry and thirsting for righteousness, and who pant and long to see God. And they're small in number, but they're disproportionate in influence, so you can't quantify their influence. But that's a life well lived. But the same token, there's a similar situation. Everybody encounters beauty. How many people really wonder about it? That's the question. See, really ask, and then even fewer are curious to wonder why that is so. Who made it? You see, this the curiosity. And why does this look this way? And what does it do? And then yet the smallest number submit to the mystery, whose marvels and beauty you can't even begin to imagine. If you can't comprehend the beauty that's at his arm's length, then how are you going to know the wellspring, the fountainhead, the source? So to submit to the mystery we call God, actually a sense of holy terror and awe I will sometimes get as a scientist, because I have just enough capacity to see what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the stars, to every so often be able to grasp an intuitive sense of their vast size. Just enough. And every so often I'm overwhelmed. I'm terrified. That's a holy terror. That's a good thing. And you can do that the more you look at things. I've seen things, videos of things on the microcosm. How could that be made? How could these things be? And to train yourself to wonder and watch for that. So we are privileged now to have access to things we didn't formerly access. And so I want you to try using these things and actually looking them up, because I've been looking at things about marvels in the created order. And one of the things I was looking at here was this whole idea of the epipelagic zones, looking at the ocean and the bizarre feat. And the further down you go, the more extraordinary and exotic, but with bioluminescence, just wonders and marvels, and how God comes up with these things. There's no boundary, no limit, and we can't even begin to imagine. So if you begin to look for this stuff and create a space for it. So some of you have seen my little thing with the puffer fish, but the concept here is it's like this. We see this. What does that suggest? I go here and you look at that object here. Rose window. You see? And that thing is as elegant as a rose window. And we could have never imagined. We're the first people to notice this, and it's never been known before until very recently that this was the case. Isn't that amazing stuff? So it's all around us, and the more you learn about the natural world, so you can train yourself to look for these things because they're well worthwhile. I have a love for this Bowerbird. Let me just go to the McGregor Bowerbird. And so this is a little segment. It's actually much richer than this, but it gives you an idea of what he does for mating. And he builds this huge bower that's as complex, really, as anything you can imagine. And 6 feet high this thing is, and he decorates it and puts all kinds of bling on it and everything else. And then when he attracts a mate, then he goes into this routine. So what I'm suggesting that you try to do is you can go to YouTube and you can certainly find a whole array of things about the natural world. Like, for example, objects under electron microscopes, pretty strange stuff here. So if I go to my own home page here, many things you can only see under a microscope and things of this sort. So I think it's a very creative thing for you to kind of discover things, share them with your children and grandchildren, because in doing so, you're creating a sense of apprehension, of amazement and wonder. That's all I've done. No one taught me how to do this. I'm just finding stuff. And we have things that we never had before and new discoveries we could have never imagined before, so that we begin to see, again, having a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of the beauty of the living God, and an appreciation of his majesty and works. That's what I'm seeking for us to do. Your thoughts on this?
How do atheists explain all that you just showed us?
Well, they have to. The more you see, the more the weight of burden becomes their problem, not mine. How do we account for this? So what we now have, they used to call it the God of the gaps. That was the idea. So you're just making up a God to fill in their gaps of your knowledge. Now it's evolution of the gaps. Because what's happening is you have a thin explanatory construct. All they've got is mutations and natural selection. That's neo-Darwinism. And that means that mutations are almost uniformly deleterious. They're not beneficial. As a consequence of that, there are some changes that happen within various boundaries. But if you just have chance won't produce order. And so this is this whole concept. You weigh the evidence. What you have is design, intelligent design on the left side, Darwinism on the other side. You've got design doesn't come from nowhere. You see, mindlessness doesn't produce mind. The accidents don't produce something intentional. Non-life doesn't produce life. Purposeless doesn't suddenly become purposeful. Notice all they've got is a materialistic world. And the burden of proof is on them, because you see it's getting thinner and thinner. Because the more we're learning, the less adequate their system becomes. As a consequence, they're on the edge of having an actual paradigm shift. It'll be away from neo-Darwinism. It's just the young bucks are now going to be feeling their oats, and after a while they'll say, we don't need to have the academic synthesis. We're going to break into something else. But they're not going to become theists. Instead, they'll probably become pantheists and say that intelligence lies at the substrate of matter. And some nonsense of that sort, not personal at all, you see. So it's going to be some kind of a pantheism or panentheism, the materialistic magician. So that a materialism, but they did take a leap to the upper story and become magicians when they need to do so. So it's getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and it's getting more embarrassing for them because the evidence actually continues to grow in favor of mystery and wonder and all, rather than the other way around. So just the proboscis of the butterfly, or the tongue of a hummingbird, and just what's involved in that. And there are videos about any of these. You take anything you want, zoom into it, examine it, and you realize there's no way of accounting for this on a materialistic worldview. So frankly, this is a great thing, because God is now using this. I've told you this before. It is not an accident that God revealed more about his creation during the time of the so-called Enlightenment. So it was in this 18th century that both the telescope and the microscope were were invented. You see this idea? And so during that same so-called Enlightenment, God knew they were going to move away from a theistic point of view, for a collective on the whole, and move away from that to a materialistic, but they couldn't do it right away. So they chose deism, the clockwork universe, where he wound up the universe and he hasn't been seen since. He's not involved in nature. But that's not a God worthy of worship, as you can imagine. But it was too much cognitive dissonance to go from theism to materialism. So that was a way station on the way to materialism. And then Darwin presumably made it possible for the atheist to be intellectually satisfied, so-called. So actually what's happening is, so God, knowing this is going to happen, let me now show you stuff you didn't even dream of. I'm going to show you the microcosm. I'm going to show you the macrocosm. Same century. Both are revealed. Force multipliers of nature, for the first time in human history, a force multiplier where you can now see what no one ever dreamed of existing. And both orders of magnitude. So God is using science and technology as a force multiplier for worship and awe. That's what he's doing. And people are becoming more and more stubborn and foolish in their rebellion against him, because at the end of the day, it comes down to this principle here in Romans 1. This is what you're really dealing with in our time. Romans 1:18-32. Spiritual darkness is, even though they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give thanks. They could see it. It's his eternal power, divine, being clearly understood through what's been made, so they're without excuse. But it's because they choose to suppress the truth and unrighteousness that ultimately that then distorts their minds, and then that distorts their behaviors. That's where we're living. So it's the most wonderful time and the most difficult time. But in my view, these are the days prior to the Lord's coming. So I think it's exciting that God is ironically using science and technology, the second Tower of Babel, by the way, to actually use it for his own praise and worship. With that, we are done.